Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is JP Boutros. He is a government relations advisor and strategist, a really smart guy and a very connected guy. And I got to tell you, JP, they say that, in politics, 2 weeks is like a year or two. It's amazing what's happened in the last couple of weeks. JP and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about what was going on in this housing situation, the Greenbelt situation, et cetera. And my gosh, in the last 2 weeks, Premier Ford's gone from standing strong and standing by exactly what his housing minister was doing, and the Greenbelt decisions that he had made, to this past week apologizing for making a terrible mistake. So JP, tell me what you think's going on, and is Ford doing the right thing, or did he take too long to do the right thing, or is he doing the wrong thing? And should he have stuck by? Okay. No, housing is the most important. Like, you're the government relations, the political expert. What do you think of the last, it's just been like 3 weeks, I think.
I know. And it's really more, there's also a personal aspect to it. I will start that I was there for the very first few hours of Doug and Rob Ford Doug being elected official. My first big role in government in any way was being at Toronto City Hall back in 2010, 11 through 14 when Doug and Rob Ford were there. And Doug was always the person who you talked to try to get things done if you had a disagreement. It was interesting. I mean, everyone had this vision that, he was just like his brother in terms of being straightforward, bullheaded right into things. But in truth, he was very pragmatic behind the scenes. And it was something that I told Steve Bacon way back when. It was something that I understood about him way back. And he really just wants to be liked. It's one of those things that people don't, maybe didn't appreciate until maybe a few years into his premiership. He is someone I've had disagreements with, and someone a lot of people have had disagreements with, but he's more of a libertarian than any staunch conservative. The thing that I have on a personal level is that, and I haven't talked to him about it, but, I haven't really talked to him since 2022 about much of anything. He's been very busy. Is that he really is just upset that someone in his team blew it, people we trusted. And, when we were talking about it, anything related to housing with him prior to COVID, it was about building supply. It was about increasing access to credit, increasing supply, working with the feds, working with municipalities to try to increase. And, he talked to his experts, he talked to bureaucrats, his team certainly did, and they worked harder on that. And I appreciated that. What's been happening in the last few days, few weeks, it's just scandalous. He knows it. They know it. I don't know how much he knew about what was going on. You have to have trust in government of the people, you are, tasking with things to do. The federal government, the PMO has a big team of people who are, worried about the optics of the government, about the prime minister. On the provincial level, Doug is more of a family, team, tight circle. And there's certain people who obviously breached trust that he might not have known about right away. And what his team did was wrong. But it's big and cumbersome. I mean, when you're trying to manage, 10, 11 million people and taking that responsibility on, especially post-COVID, and just trying to do things right, parts of his team blew it. And, the thing that I really appreciate on a personal level is that I haven't heard a good, heartfelt apology from a politician in a while. And it was just sort of refreshing to hear. I hope it doesn't curtail the effort to build housing. He admits he got it wrong. I'll have to admit, initially what I thought about, building on a little part of the Greenbelt, once the things came out about, what was wrong in it, I understood completely why people were getting upset. And I perhaps didn't early on because my focus has been so laser guided into let's improve housing, let's increase housing.
Which seemed to be his strategy initially, wasn't it? It was that, even if things were not perfect, we got to build this housing. And so therefore, having some small amount of the Greenbelt being released from the Greenbelt, as long as the developers and the cities commit that within a short time period, they'll provide the infrastructure and start the housing, that the people of Ontario will forgive me and will see that I'm doing the right thing for housing. But
Mhm.
that appeared not to be right. That the people were worried more about the potential corruption, or if not corruption, at least favoritism that some developers and landowners received, and were not willing to agree to that strategy. And in the end, he had to capitulate. And as you say, gave the apology on Thursday that he provided. And so my question to you is, do you think that the people of Ontario will forgive him and allow him to move on?
Yes, 3 years. I mean, when you think about, the effort that Justin Trudeau is trying to do to keep, together for 2 years as government, as minority government, working with the NDP in their package agreement, there are benefits to it that might be. The truth is, he doesn't have to really worry about it for 2.5 years. He just has to do things that, and if this affects him in the polls and it affects him personally, a year and a bit into a 4-year mandate that he has pretty much strong control. I think there's time for him to get for his party to get away with it. He himself, we will see what happens for the next little while. Progress is most important. He still has a very strong pulpit. He and Danielle Smith and David Eby are the three strongest premiers right now in terms of being able, and obviously in Quebec, they will be influencing a lot of policy federally. How he works collaboratively with certain premiers to get things that he might want for Ontario and for the provinces, that's really going to be the battle to come right now. And I think that this particular fiasco will be more forgotten. It'll be reminded by opposition leaders for sure, and rightly so. But I don't think it's going to be the thing that absolutely upsets people, because he apologized and he reversed the decision rather quickly in political timing for sure. And I think it's what it is.
So I had an argument with one of my sons the other day, and let me ask you if you think there's any analogy here. I said, think about the first term of Doug Ford. In the first, what was it, 9 months, he came on very headstrong and really wanted to ram a whole bunch of different things through. The public responded extremely negatively to him. He was down in the polls, and Justin Trudeau in the federal election effectively ran against Doug Ford, and because of that, did well in Ontario. Then during COVID, Doug Ford changed his attitude, became a far more reasonable, maybe some people would say moderate or centrist politician. Listened to the scientists in a way that a lot of people didn't think Doug Ford would do, and his polls went up. He was laser focused on COVID and some of the things in regards to dealing with that pandemic. And last year he won a majority government, and a stronger majority than the first time, even after that first year. So is that an analogy here? Is that this is so early on, he may learn the lesson, and in 3 years he could still go on to win a majority government? What do you think?
I can't see why not. I mean, it's always based on what the alternative is. Um, Many things can happen in the next little while. It comes down to trust. One of the things I told this is going back a bit, and it's one of the things that's actually happening probably in the United States right now. Before Donald Trump, there was Rob Ford in terms of the template of how to run a place and just basically say the things you want to say, do it, and then just decide to heck with the people who disagree. The people who trust me. And it was something that I saw firsthand. One of the things about Doug is that he does pivot, he does listen, he does change, and ultimately people have to ask, who do you trust with whatever? People tend to forget that, pollsters tend to forget, no one knows how you vote. No one knows, seeing there, you don't have to tell people how you vote. And most people don't really share what their opinions are. People will vote for people who they'll forgive in people what they'd forgiven themselves. That's really what it comes down to in terms of voting intentions. If they think that he is going to do better for them and his government than the alternative, he'll win again because he has he's a known quantity. That's what happened with Justin and Justin's situation. I mean, the prime minister has a very different situation in that it's very fragmented, and really 38% will win you, 35% will win you government now. That's not really the case in Ontario, but it's a pretty high, 40% is still going to win you a majority. I would like to see the alternatives. I want to see a good debate of ideas. I personally don't share how I, intend to vote, but I need to have a reason to, I believe voters need to have a reason to vote elsewhere at this point. And Ontario, he's going to have a couple of bad years, and I think he'll be able to blame others, perhaps rightly and perhaps wrongly, for any issues that might come up in the next 2 years, especially when it comes to
you and I have had this discussion before. Mistakes get made. People make mistakes, and sometimes they're personal mistakes and judgment, and sometimes they're the mistakes in your organization, companies or cabinets or whatnot. Do you change course and apologize quickly, or do you hold the line and fight through? And when we chatted last time, we had the example of Donald Trump, who sort of never apologizes and just keeps on, ramming it through. Mm-hmm. We talked about Patrick Brown, who resigned that night. We talked about Justin Trudeau and how he sort of has seemed to just sort of ram through with the issues with SNC and issues with his health minister and not the health minister, his justice minister, etc. And then we had this Doug Ford situation where initially he was, no, I'm going to do the right thing for housing, even if there were mistakes made. And then 2 weeks later, he has to backtrack on that. What's the lesson here? Is it apologize quickly and close the door when you make a mistake, or is it no, be like Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau and just barrel through?
It's contextual. There is no templated answer. I mean, any good advisor would assess the situation, give the best advice to the person. If the person also has personal traits which don't allow them to either apologize, or the situation means you got to keep 120, 130 caucus members on side because you don't want to lose them piece by piece, you might not apologize. It's all contextual. In this particular situation, 3 weeks ago, I would have thought, Doug should just barrel through. And I actually think I said that to you. Obviously, things changed pretty quickly. The things that made it different were very particular. It was that whole thing at the casino that I genuinely believe he didn't know about. I know one or two people, personally from City Hall who were part of his team from that point on and have moved on. He is so loyal. If people are loyal to him, it's not fealty like Donald Trump requires. It's actual loyalty. If you show loyalty, he'll reciprocate equally. And I think that certain people probably weren't fully transparent with him about what might have been going on, and that probably just said, something, give me your papers now. And I think that's what happened. So it is contextual, back to your question. And I think that in this particular situation, Doug Ford did the political thing correctly. And also he has the luxury of time. 3 years is an eternity. I mean, 3 years is just tremendous amount of time. It also allows for opposition to rightly get an assessment of what they need to do to win government, because this shouldn't have been the issue. If you're looking for some sort of red herring item, whether it's an island airport or whatever thing you might need to just say, point to that, get some people on side and get a critical mass of people to support you. That's not going to move a lot of undecideds. What's going to move undecideds is, how are you going to help my family? How are you going to make sure I have more money to put food on the table? Make sure my kid has a place to live that's outside of my basement. Those are the things that are going to influence decision making 2-3 years on.
We're chatting tonight with JP Boutros, political junkie and expert and government relations specialist. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with JP. Stay with us, everyone. This is going to be an interesting conversation tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is JP Boutros. We're talking about what's gone on in the housing file, affordable housing in Ontario, specifically Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford, and his Greenbelt fiasco and his apology of last week. But I want to move on to talk about housing in a far wider scope, if we could. And as I mentioned, our guest is JP Boutros. He's a Canadian political consultant with over 25 years of innovative and successful marketing communications in private and not-for-profit and public sectors. He's got an exhaustive knowledge of residential real estate, Canadian municipal government processes, innovative marketing and messaging, and political advocacy. He currently is very involved in the Canadian mortgage business, where he is a director of government relations. He's led the political messaging and direction on behalf of 15,000 members of Canada's National Mortgage Brokering Association. He's also been a senior policy advisor at Toronto City Council, working with Doug Ford's brother. He's been a principal of an international business for 20 years and a pioneer in a multi-million-dollar online marketing for Formula One auto racing and memorabilia. You know what? We talked about this last time. I really want to find out more about Formula One. What a fascinating opportunity. But let's come back to the housing situation, if we could. So, a month ago, you would have said Doug Ford and Steve Clark, the Premier and the former Minister of Housing, have had the most sort of pro-housing supply, pro-development government in history. Bill 109, Bill 23, the Affordable Housing Task Force, ministerial zoning orders, this major transit zone initiative that's going to increase, hasn't been announced yet, but is going to increase density around transit zones. All of those things were, I think, appropriate for a housing affordability crisis that we're in, trying to dramatically increase supply. Given this Greenbelt fiasco, which has been, it would appear, the main attention, preoccupation of the government for the last 3 weeks, where do you think we are today? Is the government going to step back from that strategy? Are they going to have to take a step back from that strategy because people are going to be worried about corruption or problems or issues, in every kind of strategy? Or do you think they'll continue on this strategy of being pro-development, pro-supply? What's your assessment? What would your advice, if you were talking to Doug Ford today, be?
Brian, I don't think that the strategy itself was, the problem. I mean, the, pro-supply, pro-housing is still going to sell, and it's still what people want. And, for all the reasons we've discussed earlier, the Greenbelt aspect of it is certainly, filled in, so to speak. That is not going to happen now. But that doesn't really change the tactics or the need for the provincial government to use their pulpit, to use their carrot and stick approach to get municipalities to play ball. I don't know how Minister Calandra will be different than Minister Clark to this point, other than being probably a more effective communicator, having had that experience. It is up to the municipalities to also decide how they want to lobby the province for various things. There will be horse trading on things. I mean, that is what's going to happen as well. I don't think he needs to change anything in that regard. The problem is that it's federal policies as well, and just the nature of the environment that is going to make it harder to create supply at this point as it is. You don't have, conducive economic environment to, inspire builders to build when it's 7, 8, 9% to get a building loan right now. If that, there's no assurance that people will have the economic fortitude to go buying a home at this point when, it is what it is. And the supply issue is only going to get worse at this point, because if you have nothing to move into, if you're a move upper, there's no way you're going to lose that locked rent controlled, let's say if you're paying $1,700 or $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, and you see that it's $2,200, $2,300 average across the nation right now, you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot and leave. If you have a fixed mortgage right now, as a lot of people still do, everyone thinks that variable mortgage, that people are just losing their houses right now. It isn't the case, because it's only about 18% of people who have variable mortgages and might be affected by rates in the next little while. Those people who are paying fixed mortgages right now and locked in 21, 20, early 22 and 20, they are paying down a lot of principal right now because their rates might be under 2% in some instances on a 5-year. When they get to 2026, that's when they're really going to have to worry. Those people are not going to move unless they take their mortgage with them to a place that they might want to move to. They're stable. Most people in Ontario are actually stable in their housing needs right now. And that's something that people tend to forget. The people who are affected, they in variable situations, in let's say marital breakdowns, or needs change. They're the ones who are really being affected right now. And something that is really, really hard. A lot of our housing precedents and the way we think things are over the past 30 and 40 years is because we had two incomes or a decent income, household income to buy a house that was reasonably priced way back when. The new world is that single people are buying homes and need to buy homes. They might never want to get married. They might never want to be, with anybody else, or they are no longer with somebody else. And that's what's making it harder for people as well. And it's very hard to get people to realize that still 70% of people who have their housing needs right now are locked in for the next few years and could ride this storm out if rates go down. So they're not moving. Renters are not going to move out because they can't find the house they want. Owners who have fixed mortgages are not going to leave because it'd be silly to. Where are they going to go to? They have fixed costs and it's understood. And the supply just isn't going to come online quickly enough to make economic sense. If you are an investor, you might be in an interesting situation if you're just about to close, should you be able to close. But by and large, you're not going to increase supply anytime soon. And rates are not going to come down very quickly. We might have a tabletop kind of interest rate environment.
So I agree with you. I think rates are not going to come down. And so therefore the high construction loan, variable interest rate construction loans are dampening construction activity, people initiating. But I get probably an email, honestly, twice a day about some assignment sale of some condominium. So there are so many investors that bought pre-construction condos a couple of years ago and are now having to come to the table to close. And they either don't have the cash to close or they can't get the appraisal that they need to get the bank loan they need, or they can't afford the high interest rate that they need to borrow at to close. And so therefore they're doing assignment sales. Isn't that going to have an impact on price? So far, prices are staying up.
Truthfully, Brian, a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines with money. The problem right now is that the rich could have a good chance of getting richer. If you've kept your powder dry and you've got that empty line of credit and you have that stable income and you have that stable, outflow of money, if your rates are locked in for another 3-4 years, you can take a chance right now. So assignment sales, yes, there are people who are going to lose their shirts on a few things. It's not going to mean that there isn't a demand. There are people who are going to pick up on these properties, especially if they see the math works out. The truth is that way long time ago, the economists, and this is something, this might be dating me a bit, 20 times annual rent was a sensible price for the purchase of a home. So if a place rented for $1,000 a month, $240,000 was a fair price for that property. Those metrics changed. That was in a 4 to 5% environment way back when. That was the Economist magazine that taught me that 25 years ago. We've never had that situation in Canada as long as I've been a homeowner. It's always been about a 30 to 35 times, sometimes metric. And when things were renting at $2,000 a month but selling for $600,000, the math didn't make sense to me. But a lot of people were sitting on the sidelines waiting for something to drop, doing the Warren Buffett thing, wait until the tide rolls out to see who's wearing trunks. This is that time, the next couple of years, where people are going to be saying, I shouldn't have bought that place. I shouldn't have, and they're going to fold. It doesn't mean the prices are going to come down, because it comes down to a lack of supply. There's going to be someone out there who will take advantage. And we're talking about, several thousand units, perhaps. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people losing their homes simultaneously.
Okay, so
and that's the kind of thing, and that's the truth of it.
so lack of supply is the issue. Okay, so you're not worried about my concern that the prices are going to have to be impacted by these assignment sales, and we'll see what ends up happening. Last time we
It
chatted, we
could be in
talked
a
about
micro.
this.
It could be in a microeconomic environment. It could be very isolated in certain
Yeah.
pockets of the city. It also comes down to the demand of being in that city as well, or in that area.
Last time we chatted, we talked about this new rule about major transit zones, and that we thought the provincial government was going to be dramatically increasing density and height around all major transit zones. And there's some rumors that that was going to be announced at the AMO, the Association of Municipalities conference in August, and it wasn't. And I think you were the one that told me that you thought that the government was taking a pause and really looking at that strategy. Do you think it's going to come out as strong and as beneficial to density around transit zones? Because I think that still makes a ton of sense. In fact, I think if anything, they should be increasing that, maybe adding some affordability, inclusionary zoning kind of aspect, and maybe even increasing it from 800 meters to a kilometer. So I think it makes a ton of strategy, and I think the public will be supportive of that. But I guess I've got concerns that we haven't heard anything in like 2 months since it was last rumored.
Well, it's been a different housing minister at that point as well. So I mean, there's going to be pause. I don't think there's going to be as much pause as there is at the federal government level for a lot of things. You don't have that centralized core. We got to make sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot attitude. I'm not as worried. I don't think that also we have to worry about it too much right away, because again, builders need to have the incentive to build as well. Development charges is going to be discussed. Certainly in the city of Toronto with the new mayor, there's going to be a lot of discussion about how to fund various things and what priorities actually are for the city. I do believe it still makes sense. I'm sure that the government does as well. And as long as experts and the public are generally in the ear of politicians saying increase density, get my kid out of the basement, I think that will happen. The pace might be slowed down a bit, but this is when government wakes up and says we need to do things. And also they have to make sure that they offset any issues that might be happening at different levels of government and in the world at large, because the interest rates are dictating absolutely everything. If a central bank decides it's going to induce a recession on the people, it's going to work. And that's what's going to be happening right now. It might not be official yet. Once the data finally gets reassessed by Stats Canada and is proven right, we're already in a recession.
Well, with auto workers wanting a 40% increase, inflation is just going to continue. They've got to do something to bring inflation down. We got to take another break. We're going to come back in 2 minutes with JP Boutros talking about provincial politics and housing primarily, but maybe we'll widen the conversation. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting with a political government relations expert, political junkie, someone who knows the business very well. He's worked for former Mayor Rob Ford. He's currently doing political government relations for the Mortgage Brokers Industry Association. And he's really a well-connected, smart guy. JP Boutros is our guest. JP, let's go through some of the other issues if we could. And maybe I'll put it in this perspective. Again, I had a really interesting discussion with someone just last week where we talked about if you were the Premier of Ontario and you had this situation with this, calamity with the Greenbelt, and you had this housing affordability crisis, would you take a step back and moderate, or would you even accelerate because you wanted to change the channel and get people even more attention to the housing crisis? And so therefore we've got the major transit zone issue. You mentioned just a second ago, development fees. There's these bills that shorten the time period that municipalities have to approve things. The leader of the Conservative Party federally has been talking about withholding infrastructure money if municipalities don't make more rapid their approvals. If you were advising Doug Ford right now, what would you tell him to do?
whatever political capital he still has with the people of Ontario is based on believing that he is going to do the right thing for Ontarians. If he still believes that we need to do, to increase housing, and that is the way path forward, do it. He cannot, the thing that he has to protect the most is the economic structure of cities. Right now, the issue really is that people are leaving the cities that have had the biggest investment put into them. I don't think it's the case as much in Mississauga. I'm very positive on Mississauga myself. And I mean, the nature of Mississauga is that it was very well planned from the start and is developing in a way that is positive and will take people away from the city of Toronto as it was. The issue with Toronto is that it is such an important part of the entire economic structure of Ontario that when you have people deciding not to go to work and commute back downtown to offices that are completely empty at times, or certainly now they're 40 or 50%, but there's a lot of empty space there. That's the biggest problem right now. If I'm advising Doug Ford, I'm making sure that I'm ready with a plan to ensure that people want to return back to work, that commercial real estate doesn't fall into a pit, that they're not overly burdened with a tax bill to basically make up for a loss in property taxes, or because buildings don't vote and corporations don't vote, but individuals too. So Mayor Olivia Chow is going to have an interesting time trying to negotiate and thread the needle of getting more money, saying the city is broke, while trying to hit up corporations and commercial real estate people for more money on the property tax side and individuals. He cannot lose sight of the fact, the Premier cannot lose sight of the fact that the biggest issue right now is ensuring that we get some semblance of normalcy and a return back to what it was back in 2018 and 2019, because that's when the growth was happening. That was a trajectory that, collectively people were most comfortable with. We cannot have new norms established that make it much harder for the country to grow economically.
But how does he do that? We've got a major investment in new transit with the Ontario line. We've got this major transit area policy that's hopefully going to increase density around transit zones. He doesn't control COVID. Looks like COVID may be having a resurgence this fall. How can he ensure people go back to offices downtown Toronto?
The truth is that there's always been a focus on building new transit. Scarborough certainly needs it. The Eglinton Crosstown is a very interesting case in that it was, planned thinking, 10, 15 years down the road, what was going to happen and build accordingly. What needs to be done is better building around existing transit. If you go anywhere east on the Danforth, for instance, in Toronto, or west on parts, High Park is not quite the same, and certainly Islington and the terminus points on the west side of Toronto are different as well.
But
anywhere there
like
is
existing
transit. Yeah, anywhere along existing transit is where you need to increase density. You don't need to put the cart before the horse and then build transit and then hope that things are built around it. That's one way of doing it. But the stuff that's already existing and already high density, has the ability and the infrastructure that taxpayers have paid for and continue to pay for all the time. That's the stuff you need to build around already. When it comes to ensuring that people go back to the office, I feel for landlords right now because, you have a federal government which says, oh, you can work remotely if you're an MP. And is basically ingraining in people it's okay to be away from work. The benefits for the individual and for families is very strong as well, and that is a very wonderful counter argument that was caused by calamity. If you didn't have COVID, you would have understood that you could possibly work from home rather effectively. So it's a really tough thing, but planning 10 years down the road when one thing can just basically throw everything, out of the way, it's a very tough thing. For me, what I would advise Doug Ford privately is try to make sure that the commercial cores of cities remain viable and conducive to making the economy grow of Ontario. And in terms of housing, be laser focused still on ensuring that you increase density with the help of municipalities in existing higher orders of transit.
Okay, so he had a much publicized meeting with Olivia Chow, the new mayor of Toronto, last week, and Mayor Chow is recommending a sales tax for the city of Toronto, and Doug Ford said no to that. So, one of the big issues that you've got in not just Toronto, but frankly, the Greater Toronto Area, is deficits caused by COVID and the spending that they had during COVID, infrastructure spending, and the fact that the provincial government is ensuring that development fees are less. What would you do if you were Doug Ford in regards to the budget situation for the city of Toronto?
He has his opinions. I think the biggest mistake of the past, two biggest mistakes of the past 25 years that relate to cities in the city of Toronto. One is amalgamation. You had five parts of Toronto that weren't the city of Toronto having the views of the city of Toronto imposed on them, and that caused a reflexive issue and created the ability for Rob Ford to become mayor. I'm not saying that him becoming mayor was a good or bad thing. I'm saying that if you didn't have amalgamation, you wouldn't have had some of the issues that are occurring right now in the city of Toronto. Two, that when times were good and the GST was reduced by the federal government under Stephen Harper in 05 or 06, that Dalton McGuinty didn't just simply raise the PST at that point. We wouldn't have known the difference as a whole as to how much percent of tax we were paying on a combined 15%. When it went from 15 to 13, you could have kept it at 15, said 1% is going to the city, to cities and municipalities directly, and then had the consumption tax and no need for a sales tax discussion that you're having since Shelley Carroll was David Miller's budget chief. She's doing that again now because it is the thing that gets press. It says we tried, we knew we're not going to get it. We know that CODA is not going to allow us to do it unless the province says we can raise a sales tax or any sort of consumption tax of that nature. If we had raised the if we had raised the PST when the GST was lowered federally, you could have had a seamless transition and had a little more money for cities at that point. I seriously doubt that Premier Doug Ford would raise any sales tax for the purposes of doing it that way. We'll see what kind of debt load and how long interest rates keep, smashing governments, because interest rates affect governments just as much. They're the biggest borrowers. It's tough.
JP, you've been in politics a long time and government relations a long time. The banner that you've got on your social media includes you having a picture with Brian Mulroney, with Jean Chrétien, with Stephen Harper, and with Justin Trudeau. So you've worked with a lot of political leaders. What do you think is the key to success in political leadership?
Understanding people, like being empathetic, being able to look at it from the other side, being able to look at it from the perspective of the common person. I think Jean Chrétien was an absolute master at understanding, and he gained that trust. And Doug Ford has a bit of that. I know it's going to rile a lot of people. I mean, his McCallion certainly had that. It is just understanding people, appreciating, having been in a lot of different positions. Someone like Jean Chrétien was the minister of everything at one point. He had tried every portfolio. He was rather successful in every portfolio. I mean, Constitution and everything. I have great admiration for what he was able to do. And, for instance, in the Gulf War, and just make a decision. You trusted him. I mean, trust is the most important thing. The problem obviously now is that everybody has much more information available to them. It's a much more decentralized structure of media. I mean, we're talking now that something's going to be published on YouTube. In the old days, you would have trusted 3 or 4 people to convey the news to you. A personal touch, trust, and being straight with people is a very, very important characteristics. And that's the kind of thing that'll get you pretty far in politics these days.
You were quoted in 2019 in Perspectives magazine saying that housing was the inescapable election issue. And in 2017, you were interviewed in a book called Toronto on the Verge of Greatness. And you, in 2017, said that Toronto has a critical need for greater housing density and the reduction of the influence of NIMBY attitudes and tactics which throttle growth. You've been on this issue for a long time. How come we haven't solved it yet?
Sort of unsolvable in a lot of ways. I mean, you have to basically take it for what it is. You cannot try to have a pan-national attitude and solution to very local issues. If you go back to Tip O'Neill in the United States, famous Speaker of the House, all politics is local, and local issues are the things that drive things the most. If you are going on a higher level and expecting, big solutions that, from characters who really don't have that much influence over small, localities, you're hoping against hope. It really is a more local thing. The housing issue is one that is perplexing. I mean, there's some ideas that we're going to be working on, me with CMBA, in regards to trying to equalize the access to home ownership in a way that probably hasn't been in the last 25, 30 years. When those proposals come forward between now and November, maybe we'll get a conversation started on all of that. It is about equalizing access. Anyone who's been a parent and also been a first-time home buyer as well, you say, I want what's best, for my kids. And yeah, I think that's everybody's belief, whether they have children or not. They do want what's better for themselves. Housing is always a key to that. And because home ownership has become, for all intents and purposes, a pension fund for the middle class and those seeking to join it, as Justin Trudeau would say it will always be something that people aspire to. And as long as people aspire to it and the supply is low, you're going to have that problem.
JP Boutros, thanks so much for joining us and talking about what's going on in the province of Ontario and politics. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Much appreciated. Take care.
We're going to take a break and come back with my own personal comments on the housing crisis in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Thanks, JP.